Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Byrne. I'm our Global Tree Conservation Manager at the Morton Arboretum. And like Sylvia said, I'll be talking more about our oak conservation work, specifically within the Global Conservation Consortium for Oak and our Meta Collection Partnership Program. But first, to give you a bit of background, I want to just give a high-level overview of what these global conservation consortia are. So the Global Conservation Consortia formed under Botanic Gardens Conservation International in partnership with lead Botanic Gardens and Arboreta to lead the individual conservation consortia. And as Sylvia mentioned, the State of the World's Trees, which highlights the 1 in 3 tree species are threatened with extinction. The Global Conservation Consortia are great networks that are essentially scaling up tree conservation action to address the threats to trees globally. These consortia are utilizing specialist knowledge of the target taxa for each of the individual consortia. They're conserving trees where there is greatest need, and they're focusing a lot on in situ within the species native range and as well as ex situ or outside the species native range. Focus in the centers of diversity for those target taxa. And as I mentioned, they're led by institutions based in the centers of diversity for the taxa. And overall, the mission of the consortia is to mobilize a coordinated network of institutions and experts to collaboratively develop and implement comprehensive conservation strategies for priority threatened plant groups. And these are the individual consortia. Currently, a few more actually have formed since as well, but the Morton Arboretum is leading the Global Conservation Consortium for Oak. And just to give you a better sense of where we are working as the Global Conservation Consortium for Oak, this heat map is showing the centers of diversity for oak globally. There are an estimated 450 oak species based off of the Red List of Oaks 2020 report. And this is showing where there are the number of threatened oak species globally. So you'll see in China and Southeast Asia, a high number of threatened oak species, as well as the United States and Mexico and Central America. And this is where, as the GCCO, we are leading regional efforts with local partners and collaborators. But zooming into the US, this heat map from the Conservation Gap Analysis of Native US Oaks is just showing the threatened quercus or oak species richness by county in the United States. And you'll see the number of threatened oaks lie within the Southeast United States, Texas, and the Southwest, as well as California. And essentially, the gap analysis assessed the 91 native US oak species for their level of conservation concern. By doing this, they assessed the species threats in the US, vulnerability to climate change, as well as representation and exit to collections and more. And so this is just showing the assessment that they did of the oak species representation in ex situ or living collections by provenance type. So on the x-axis is the 91 native US oak species. The y-axis is showing the number of plants in collections. The different colors in the bars represent the provenance type of the species, if it was wild collected or horticulture origin. And the red bars indicate those 28 species of conservation concern that the gap analysis identified from those different analyses that I mentioned. And you'll see that majority of the species of conservation concern, they're really underrepresented in living collections. There's very few plants in living collections for those oak species of concern. So the GCCO is taking this information from the gap analysis to address these gaps in living collections. But why is exit to conservation so important? It ultimately serves as opportunities for research, provides seed for restoration efforts, education and outreach opportunities, as well as ultimately an insurance policy against extinction. But as the consortium, to address this gap of oaks in living collections, we want to make sure we're doing it in a strategic way. So we're taking information from publications like this one toward the meta collection and implementing this in the work that we're doing within the consortium. And ultimately, what this term meta-collection means is the combined holdings of a group of collections. Collections are stewarded by separate institutions, but they collaborate together for research and conservation purposes. And this publication recommended that no one garden or collection can or should hold all plants. A coordinated meta-collection model is needed. And to ensure high conservation value, living collections should capture maximum wild genetic diversity, which Sean will talk more about a bit in his work. But essentially, the GCCO is working under this meta-collection model to address those gaps in living collections for oaks in the US and globally. And so I'm going to share a few examples now of this meta-collection partnership program that we have been implementing. So we are very grateful for the partnership that we've had with the U.S. Forest Service, as this has leveraged establishing these meta-collection sites for the species of conservation concern. So I coordinated a partnership between the Donald E. Davis Arboretum based in Alabama, working with the curator there, Patrick Thompson, and the Region 8 geneticist, Marcus Warwell, to identify a site to plant Quercus boyntonii and Quercus georgiana, two species of conservation concern, at a U.S. Forest Service site. Because usually the traditional botanic gardens and arboreta, they do a lot of the on-the-ground collecting for these species of concern, but they usually lack space to plant a large number of individuals of these species of concern where they would ideally capture sufficient genetic diversity in these large plantings. So we worked with Marcus to identify a site, which is Beach Creek Genetic Resource Management Area, or GRMA, and we worked with the managers there to plant out, to date now, more than 100 Quercus boyntonii acorns and seedlings, and about more than 12 Quercus georgiana seedlings as well. And this site has been really successful, and we're hopeful that this site will provide seed for potential restoration efforts in the future, as well as distribution to other ex situ collections. And this will also provide some insight into the species climate resiliency, as this is located in North Carolina, and this is more north of the species native range. So getting data from this site will be very interesting to see how the species responds to the different climate. As for another example of the Meta Collection Partnership Program, San Diego Botanic Garden has been working with the Ocean Knoll Elementary School, and I helped facilitate some of the planting as well. And they essentially have established this site. It was a creek bed that was full of invasive plants, and the elementary school partnered with San Diego Botanic Garden to remove these invasive plants to then restore with native California plants like the native Quercus stumosa, another one of our species of conservation concern. And this site is really great because it will serve as educational opportunities and raising awareness of critically endangered oak native to California. Some of the students help plant the trees with us, and they'll be utilizing this site for future educational opportunities as well. And then finally, for a third example of the Meta Collection Partnership Program, myself, I worked with Stevens Lake Park Arboretum, and they partnered with the City of Columbia to establish several sites of Quercus acerifolia, another species of conservation concern, across the city. And they have also worked with Sean Hoban, who will actually probably talk more about this, providing guidance after doing thorough genetic analyses of the species, in which they were able to identify which individuals and how many individuals of the species should they plant at these various sites to ensure they're capturing and maximizing the genetic diversity, the wild genetic diversity of the species across these sites. And essentially, this is helping increase the urban canopy in Columbia, and it's replicating the native geographic and genetic distribution of in ex situ sites. And then finally, I just want to highlight also our important partnerships with Indigenous communities. As the consortium, myself and our partners have been working to ensure that we are working with Indigenous communities to support their oak restoration and planting efforts as well. We have attended Earth Day events at various Indigenous community reservations to connect with and learn more about the work that they're doing and how we can better align and support their oak restoration efforts, especially for maybe the more significant oak species that are culturally important to these communities. And we have partnered with Viejas Reservation to connect them with other partners such as San Diego Botanic Gardens, San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, and native tree nurseries to collect and grow their native Engelmann oak, another species of concern, to then hopefully plant out at the reservation in an oak restoration planting that they have planned later this year. So it's been very exciting and very wonderful to do this as well. And it's been very important as part of our partnership with the U.S. Forest Service. So thank you all so much for your time to learn more about oak conservation in the U.S. and what we've been doing to address exit to conservation gaps for these species of conservation concern. I'm happy now to pass it off to Sean Hoban, who will talk more about genetic diversity.